Right. Welcome, everyone, and happy Earth Day. So, to those that don't know, today is the anniversary of the birth of the modern environmental movement that started in 1970. So, I am Nkosazana Makoti, the Vice Chairperson of the Science Faculty Council at Wits University, and I'm going to be your pilot for today. So, before we take off, I'd like just to make you all aware that the aim of our organizers, the Wits Climate Justice Charter movement, is to enlighten us about the movement in response to the National Day of Action that was called upon by the Climate Justice Charter movement. So another call to action was this another response to the National Day of Action that's nearby is by the University of Johannesburg. So there's a Center for Africa-China Studies, and they're calling upon students, staff, people in the community to pick up trash in the immediate environment or to start a vegetable garden and take pictures, and you can just take pictures of yourself and then tag them with the hashtag CACS Earth Day Drive. All right. If you guys have any questions throughout this journey, please do use the chat box and then they'll be addressed towards the end. All right. So, joining us today, we have three speakers. And so I'd firstly like to introduce William Shoki, who is a student and writer from Johannesburg, who will be addressing the historical necessity of the Climate Justice Charter and the drafting thereof. Secondly is Rais Nurbai, and he is the current chairperson of the Wits Student Forum, a member of the Wits Coalition for Free Education, and an activist with the Wits Palestine Solidarity Committee, South Africans Against Fascist India, and the Climate Justice Charter movement. He is also a member of the Workers' and Socialist Party and currently co-authoring a paper on the climate crisis for the upcoming Working Class Summit. And then our last speaker will be Awande Buthelezi, who is a researcher and organizer for the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center, and is also an activist with the South African Food Sovereignty and Climate Justice Charter movement. And my apologies, I didn't mention what Rais will be covering. He'll be covering the Climate Justice Charter and the Working Class Summit, while Awande will be addressing the current state of the Climate Justice Charter movement and the way forward. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Mr. William to start with his section.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Nkosazana, and I'm excited to be speaking to everyone today, and especially excited to be on a panel with Rais and Awande. I just want to mention that in addition to it being Earth Day today, it's also the birthday of Comrade Awande. So if people are in the mood to be nice, they should wish him happy birthday in the chat. Shame he's caught working today and doesn't have time to take the day off. So yeah, we're all appreciative of your time, Awande. So to get started on today's program, because I'm aware that we only have an hour, I'm going to be speaking about the historical origins of the Climate Justice Charter. And before I bring out the presentation that I have to present today, the PowerPoint presentation, I just want to talk very briefly about the broader backdrop from which the Climate Justice Charter emerged. So I think everyone in the room today is well aware of the extent of the climate crisis. All of us know the many facts and figures. We know the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report, which talks about a 2 to 3% degree Celsius increase every single year. We know that it's on the precipice of being catastrophic. And I think that what has changed over the last 10 years is a growing international consensus about the fact that the problem exists. I think that if you talk to most people, barring a very crazy minority, most people will readily acknowledge that the climate crisis is a problem. I think that what a lot of people still don't agree on is what exactly do we need to do about it. And I think that there are two general approaches to how to deal with the climate crisis. The one I think is a kind of techno-solutionism. So I think this describes a range of proposals for dealing with the climate crisis, which centers technological innovation. So a lot of people understand the climate crisis as being something that can be overcome if we just create better and better technologies that can adapt us to the new world that we are moving towards. And I think I would count billionaires like Elon Musk as belonging to this cohort. And then I think that there is another approach to the climate crisis, which emphasizes that it is not simply something that requires a technical fix. It's not something that we can just invent the right device, which will be able to suddenly solve the problem, but it requires a political solution as well, which is to say that it requires a radical restructuring of our society so that we can prevent the very degradation of nature which led us to this position in the first place. And I think that's why when we think of the Climate Justice Charter, the charter itself doesn't really propose any specific policies or any specific technological innovations which are important for tackling the climate crisis, but I think more fundamentally speaks to the kind of vision for a society where we need to reorganize the way in which we relate to each other in such a way that we can actually deal with the climate crisis. So to just share my screen so I can show you the presentation, which actually describes how this thing was put together. The Climate Justice Charter emerges out of many years of campaigning by the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. It it began over the campaigns for food sovereignty in South Africa. Now, food sovereignty in broad strokes just means the response to the hunger crisis, which many South Africans suffer from, and trying to understand how can we deal with hunger in a way that empowers people to take ownership over their own lives and to address these problems directly in their own circumstances. So in 2014, the Rights to Food dialogues were held by the South African by COPAC actually, and it was agreed that a national campaign would be begun in 2015. This assembly happened to launch the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign and the Hunger Tribunal in 2016. When the drought in Cape Town started to worsen, as well as in other parts of the country, there was a drought speak out in a national bread march and the launch of the South African Food Sovereignty People's Act in Parliament. And then that was presented to national government departments in 2017. In 2018, a dialogue happened with Parliament and drought, and the Climate Justice Charter process began. And then in 2019, the process began officially. Now, what did this process involve? It was a pretty wide-ranging process. In fact, it came out of all of these years of campaigning. You can see photographs here from the many events, marches, and dialogues which took place. And then the very process to develop the charter involved 6 roundtables throughout 2019. The broad idea here is that it's a charterist politics. So the Freedom Charter obviously borrows its name and its nature from the Freedom Charter, which was adopted in 1955. And that process, like this process, emphasized constituency building, emphasized engaging with different stakeholders, so that although this was presenting a very radical and emancipatory vision, it would be universalist in character, which is to say that it would emphasize how this spoke to every single different group in society and was in the interest of every different group in society. So whether that was water-stressed communities, the media, organized labor, young people, faith-based organizations, as well as social and environmental justice organizations. The emphasis here is that when it comes to charting a vision for society in order to fundamentally change that society, it had to be something that involved everyone within that society. And so this dialogue continued well into 2020. The charter was finalized in an online assembly where we specifically forefronted the voices of ecofeminists to talk about how women are often at the brunt, bear the brunt of the climate crisis, but they don't do so in a way that leaves them helpless. They are mobilizing and they are organizing responses to it. The final charter was launched on Youth Day, as well as an online petition calling for Parliament to adopt the charter, after which different constituencies were mobilized, including and particularly water-stressed communities. Many people know that when COVID-19 began last year, there was a tremendous crisis where communities were without water, and water became increasingly vital as not only a way to provide life in general for people, but to assist us to respond to the pandemic and the demands that it placed on us. And then a National Day of Action was held, and this all built up to the National Day of Action on the 16th of October, where the Charter was formally handed over to Parliament. The National Deputy Speaker of Parliament was present, as well as different political parties invited so that they could be engaged in the Charter. Of course, the big three political parties, the ANC, and EFF, were invited. They declined the invitations, but we did have some representatives from other parties, such as the Al Jamaa Party, as well as the African Transformation Alliance, and two others whose names I'm now forgetting. But this formal handover happened, and we gave Parliament exactly 1 year to give a response. And if that doesn't happen, then 16 October this year, we're going to be back at Parliament, making demands upon them and emphasizing that the climate crisis is not on lockdown, and we need to organize a societal wide response to the climate crisis. But it's not just any societal wide response, but it's one that emphasizes what we have to do in order to make sure that it is thoroughgoing society. So it's one that has to advance in awareness that we can thrive and coexist on one planet, inspire, break with the thinking that emphasizes growth, that emphasizes the exploitation of nature. And so we also need to reconnect with an earth-centered approach of what it means to be human. We need to deepen our cooperation with each other, overcome the crisis of corporate captured leadership that has resulted in the endemic of corruption, as we all know, as well as strengthen our democracy. So it needs to be truly participatory. And so it also has to be governed by the principles of climate justice, social justice, ecocentric living, participatory democracy, socialized ownership, international solidarity, because the climate crisis does not only affect South Africa, it affects the entire continent. And increasingly, we are seeing these impacts as tropical cyclones, for example, happen in Mozambique and in our neighboring countries. That's going to lead to the rise of climate refugees whom we need to house, whom we need to treat with humanity, but also coordinate responses such that in the countries that people are in, whether they are neighboring, whether they're far away from us, that we are able to deal with the climate crisis collectively. It needs to emphasize decoloniality as well as intergenerational justice as well. So this is entirely about advancing systemic alternatives. The idea behind the charter is that, as I was saying in the beginning, it's not just a technical fix that tapers around the edges, that still allows people to profiteer, to exploit nature, but it's one that is about changing society as a whole and using the climate crisis, which is the crisis of our time, to spur that change in nature. And so it needs to involve democratic and participatory deep just transition plans, socially owned and community owned renewable energy, feeding ourselves through food sovereignty, empowering people to feed themselves, as well as democratizing the water commons. Water is a natural resource that belongs to everyone. It cannot be in private hands. And this is something that the Charter underscores. We want to enjoy living slowly. I think all of us at this stage exhausted because life just moves so quickly. There's so much to do. And that is connected through to a worldview that emphasizes how we constantly need to be exploiting nature, constantly need to be hustling. And we want to say, no, we take it easy, we take it slow, and we enjoy our life in common. Eco-mobility, zero waste and simple living, eco-social housing, going beyond mainstream economics, which emphasizes this neoclassical rational subject who only wants to maximize their self-interest, as well as forcing the rich to pay the ecological debt, because ultimately it's big corporations that are responsible for the devastation, which is now affecting all of us. So we know that knowledge is crucial to the survival. We need to be installing holistic and preventative healthcare, the rights of nature, as well as a climate conscious media. So I'm not going to go in detail through the rest of these slides. I can share them in the chat if people would like. But again, it's about emphasizing participatory planning, redesigning state structures so that it can run effectively, but that it includes everyone in the running of the state. And it's not just a situation where people are making decisions on your behalf and you aren't able to participate in that. Strengthening local government, reducing wasteful spending and corruption, and advancing a climate justice orientation in international relations and foreign policy, which includes a radical Pan-Africanism. So at the end of this, it's about advancing people's power for commenting and the climate justice deal for South Africa. The Climate Justice Charter is quite left-wing, but we want to emphasize that it's about advancing it through a united people. And in our struggle against colonialism, apartheid, and neoliberalism, we know that what unites us is our common circumstance and fighting for a better world, not just our unique identities. And so we say forward to the Climate Justice Charter and a deep, just transition to sustain life. And hopefully, if you have any questions, if you're not sure about what this entails, then I hope this has somewhat convinced you that this is a worthwhile thing to be a part of. And the struggle continues. It will continue all throughout this year and leading up to October 16. So I hope that above anything, you will get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, William. In the interest of time, I'd like to move on to Raiz. You can take the floor.
Hi, comrades. Good afternoon. Thank you, comrades of the Climate Justice Charter Movement, for hosting me. Comrade Nkosazana did speak to this, but I'm part of a group that is drafting the environmental crisis paper for the working class. And I'm working alongside a number of co-authors, Francina Nkosi, who's a GBV and climate justice activist, Alex Limferna, who is with 350.org and the Climate Justice Coalition. And together we're taking part in this process of building the Working Class Summit effectively, and the policies and the discussions of the Working Class Summit. And the idea of the Working Class Summit is to build a united movement of the working classes that can support and coordinate struggle and solidarity in different domains of struggle, in different theaters of struggle. So that's the context of the climate justice, of the Working Class Summit. I just want to share the slides that I made and which would form the basis of what I'm speaking to today. So if I can just pull this up. Okay, hopefully that's visible, but today I'll be speaking specifically towards a revolutionary eco-socialism. So the argument concerning that is being put forward in the working class paper, at least on my side, starts with the acknowledgement of the reality that the climate crisis is a crisis of capitalism. And so it's the logic of capitalism, the logic that fundamentally underlies capitalism, of indefinite economic growth, which is the problem. And so this is the logic of accumulation and greed. And this is the logic that underlies the exploitation of the working class. It engages those affected by the activities of the neoliberal corporations driven by that logic, and is equally endangering the ecosphere, placing the very existence of life, of living on Earth, in danger. And so the most vulnerable, exploited, dispossessed, and marginalized will bear the brunt of the climate crisis if we do not confront it decisively. And this is part of the fundamental definition of climate justice, is to make sure that the most vulnerable, exploited, dispossessed, and marginalized do not bear the brunt of the impending climate crisis. And so conceptualizing this as a crisis of capitalism is crucial, because my first talking point does follow on from this, and that's on the particular issue of mining corporations. So the ideology of extractivism naturally emerges from the logic of capitalism. And extractivism acts through corporations, particularly multinational corporations, which are protected by the state. So multinational corporations, we know, have a dirty history of plunder on the African continent. And these neoliberal and neocolonial mining corporations, on the one hand, poison the water of mining affected communities. they release toxic acid mine drainage, they release radioactive pollutants. And on the other hand, they routinely exploit miners, they fail to pay a livable just wage, and they routinely fail to provide adequate living and working conditions. And so there is a common enemy here of communities and of workers. When workers rise up in protest and strike, those corporations respond through the capitalist state by the deployment of a bloodthirsty police force. This was the same police force that murdered Mtokozisi Ntumba not many weeks ago, and it was the police force that was responsible for the Marikana massacre of 2012. When community activists, on the other hand, stand up and say no, they are targeted. And so Fikile Ntshangase was murdered in her home for her opposition to Tendele Coal's extension of the Sumkela coal mine. And this is in northern KwaZulu-Natal. And so we see on both sides struggle being waged and struggle then being suppressed violently by corporations in the state. The second point I wanted to speak to was particularly agriculture in the land. And so the charter in terms of agriculture, to start with extractivism, the focus on mining that we have under this capitalist extractivist state is stealing land that can be used for farming. This in a country which is facing a crisis of hunger. And so if mining continues at the current rate, approximately 12% of South Africa's high potential arable land will be ruined. And so the Climate Justice Charter calls for the deconcentration of big farms to ensure land justice. And I think that's crucial in taking on corporate agriculture, which we'll speak to in the hunger crisis as well. And this will also be spoken to later. The Climate Justice Charter also stresses the eco-social function of land. And I'll define that a bit later. To speak to the hunger crisis, I don't want to repeat what William has said on food sovereignty and so on. 14 million people went to bed hungry before COVID-19. It is a full-blown crisis in this country that is normalized. And so we're in one of the worst droughts in our country's history, transitioning towards mass starvation, at least 30 million people who are in food stress. We know that the rollout of food parcels have failed to stem the flow of hunger, and food price increases erode any gains made by grants. And of course, the topping up of grants is something we should speak to as well. I just don't have time to. But the hunger crisis is important to understand in the context of corporate agriculture, which enables it and perpetuates it. And so food sovereignty is given as an alternative to juxtapose this inside of the Climate Justice Charter. And as William meant, it's giving people ownership and control over the means to produce their own food and create their own food systems, which reduces dependence on corporate agriculture. So it's an attempt to de-link from that system. Concerning the policy recommendations, the National Food Crisis Forum, convened by SAFC, said that the government must support grassroots efforts to establish agroecological food gardens and small-scale farms that can be used to feed communities at a local level. So this is an entirely different model of agriculture. This is system change. To move from food to water, William did speak to this as well, but water is a public good in the charter. And so before COVID-19, we know that more than half of all households did not have access to clean tapped water. We recently engaged with a service delivery protest of the residents of Tokyo Extension 2, who for more than 20 years have been fighting for basic electricity and sanitation. And so to ensure access and efficient usage of the water commons, the Climate Justice Charter calls for water and sanitation infrastructure to be upgraded, and there's a massive upgrade and rolling out that needs to be done there. It calls for it to be managed and monitored. What's crucial here is the democratic planning of water usage, which is effectively regulated while affirming citizens' rights to consume the scarce and precious resources. And so the right to water is crucial there as well. And the general principle is that water is to be conserved by all and protected from pollution. But this is not the idea of us changing this through individualism. The charter particularly puts focus on the phasing out of big industrial scale farming and coal generation, which uses massive amounts of water. I am going to go through homelessness and eco-social housing. So as a consequence of the extreme wealth inequality normalized under capitalism, many remain homeless. And so in response to this, we have a pressing need for quality public housing, which is envisioned in the Charter as part of eco-communities, villages, towns, municipal rental schemes, and cities. Concerning how these buildings are made, construction technologies and methods. So cement is a very good example. It has a very large carbon footprint, needs to be phased out as a construction technology. And the natural materials that should be used should be sustainable environmentally, but also provide for the eco-social land needs of individuals as part of a community. And we spoke to this before. Eco-social land needs are housing, agroecological food production, sustainable water use, biodiversity, child rearing, and culture. And then lastly, the charter just says that all new homes should be built to deal with climate extremes, with existing homes being retrofitted to do so, which is a practical recommendation of the charter. The other element is quality public transport, and Comrade Vishwa Satkar from COPAC likes to say that if the ANC government in 1994 pulled off one thing properly, in this particular case, renewable energy public transport, in that particular case, even if the public transport infrastructure was properly rolled out for this country, it would have entirely changed the lives of the Black working class. It would it would help erode the legacy of the apartheid spatial planning, which is something that needs to be spoken to as well. And so that's a policy that the ANC government since '94 has failed to implement. And so there is a lack of public transport infrastructure, particularly for the Black working class. And so the charter envisions a country in which every community is integrated into a mass transit system involving buses, trains, and trams, which run in renewable energy and hybrid technologies based on local eco-manufacturing. So there's a few levels there. There's the integration into the transit system. There's the buses, trains, and trams, which are the modes of transportation driven by renewable energy technologies and hybrid technologies. And this is the broader, I'm just getting a note from the organizer saying I have 5 minutes, but I'm stuck. Okay. So what the charter then, just to go back before I change the slide, we have a new system with means of transportation, quality means of transportation driven by the renewable energy technologies. So concerning renewable energy technologies, this is something that Comrade William did speak to as well, is social ownership and democratic control. So in the case of renewable energy resources, the charter advocates for social ownership of renewable energy, which is community-based. In general, the charter advocates for democratic control and ownership of workplaces and communities. The charter calls for democratic public utilities, cooperatives, commoning, communal ownership, forms of participatory planning, including participatory budgeting in towns and cities, which is something that is really crucial for us to take into consideration in the context of the austerity budget. If we had a process through which we could put together a genuine people's budget, we would see an entirely different country to the one we are now. The austerity cuts that we're fighting in higher education, as student activists, would not be as severe if we did not have austerity budgets cutting subsidies. And so participatory budget is a revolutionary recommendation that comes out of the Climate Justice Charter, which I think needs to be taken very seriously. And so in this particular, this slide, just before I go forward to how this thesis ends, the systems of ownership and control are being changed. And so this is genuine system change. And I mean, we could keep using the word system change because it's factually true, but ultimately what we're talking about is a revolution. This is a break with capitalism, and it requires an overthrowing of capitalism. And so what we need is a revolutionary eco-socialism. And so together, we are laying the foundations of a revolutionary movement of the working classes. So this is part of what the climate justice, with the Working Class Summit is about. And the climate crisis puts a timeline on this necessary revolution that we need. And so it's necessary for us to formulate a program and then unite behind that revolutionary program. Us as the student movement, organized labor and unions, those organizing in their communities for service delivery and so on, and the forces of climate justice who are present here today. We all need to unite behind a common, at least the minimum revolutionary program in order to confront the common enemy in the capitalist state, because that's what it is. We've spoken to it in the context of mining, we've spoken to it in the context of housing and transportation and different sectors of society. And specifically, yes, the exploitation of the working class. And I haven't spoken to the idea of a just transition, which should be spoken to, but I am running out of time. I want to end with saying that towards the end, the Climate Justice Charter defines itself as a signpost. And so the question is, where does it point to? And it very clearly points away from the carbon capitalism that birthed the climate crisis, which is where the thesis began, that this is the crisis of capitalism. But it points in the direction of a truly revolutionary eco-socialism. And to go back to the Working Class Summit process, the Charter is one document in formulating this policy. Obviously, as someone who was involved in the in my capacity as chair of the Physics Council in 2019, involved in the drafting of the charter, think that that program on climate justice needs to be heavily influenced by the charter. But of course, we have other voices coming in here as well. For us as the working classes, building this revolutionary intersectional movement of the working classes, for us to formulate that program, the charter is a crucial document. And I think when we take a reading of the charter, it is necessary for us to keep this timeline, this ticking time bomb in our minds. Remember that there is a timeline on the revolution. And so it is necessary for us to critically read the Climate Justice Charter and use it to actualize or to formulate and actualize a revolutionary program together as the working classes, together as those fighting capitalism. And I'd like to end there. Hopefully I haven't gone too long over time. And yeah, I'll be happy to engage questions afterwards.
Thank you, Rais. Just a reminder to everyone that's attending, if you guys have any questions, the chat box is available for you to send your questions through. And then I'd like to hand over to our last speaker, Awande.
Thank you, Chair. I will now take the lead from where William and Rais left off, having built the foundation of the creation of the Climate Justice Charter, and then taking us to its importance and its transformational potential in how it can help shape the country. I am going to present on where the movement is now and the steps we will be taking moving forward throughout the year, what our plans are. So if you will just allow me to just share my screen quick. Okay. Is that visible?
It's still loading. Oh, it's visible.
Thank you very much. So where to now, and where are we with the Climate Justice Charter movement? What are our plans? So currently we've been in phase one, and that has meant that we've been working on deepening the roots of the Climate Justice Charter to transform local and provincial governments. Some of the things that we've done, which is all culminated in today's actions, where we have 41 communities and organizations across the country partaking in their own various local actions, taking the charter, our climate science documents, which we've drafted with climate scientists from Wits, and the People's Food Sovereignty Act. They've been taking it to local government and provincial governments. And the work that we've done in the build-up to this day of taking this charter and its information to the local government has included a number of various stakeholder engagements that have helped strengthen this. And that's been the Climate Justice Charter Movement Assembly, where we have met as partner organizations within the Climate Justice Charter Movement, activist training workshops, which we've held. We recently, last week, held one with a civic organization in Queenstown, Eastern Cape, where we helped explain the process of the charter to them and talk through climate science and the way in which it affects rural communities in South Africa. We've had various outreach meetings to other constituency groups, such as faith-based community, South African informal traders, and also working movements and unions. We've also hosted community assemblies. We've also today, obviously, the culmination through the mass action and demonstrations. And we've been also working on a climate justice deal and macroeconomic framework towards how we can take the goals of the Climate Justice Charter document and its movement and actually putting it into tangible policy form. What does that look like in terms of proper government policy that can effect the kind of changes we need from the state? We've also been working on the webpage and recruitments. We've also had the National Food Crisis Forum, which is hosted and conducted by the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. It's been a very important forum in bringing together people who've been working on food sovereignty, water issues, which has helped also expand the reach and outreach of the Climate Justice Charter movement. We've had our meetings with water-stressed communities also within this National Food Crisis Forum. And currently we're working on a podcast series based off of interviews with different policy experts who will be working towards the climate justice deal, and also the various activists who have written articles on our Daily Mavericks series on the Climate Justice Charter. And these podcasts on the Daily Mavericks series are coming from the webinar series, which is also hosted by one of our youth activists, Tiamo. So this day is a culmination of the phase 1 of the Climate Justice Charter campaign, and we are now moving into phase 2. It's also important for me to emphasize that since we've come out of last year, on October 16th, we handed over the Climate Justice Charter, climate science documents, and memorandum to Parliament, to the Deputy Speaker of Parliament in our parliamentary engagement. And we'd given them a year to assess and discuss how they're going to engage with this and for them to adopt it. So I must underline that we will be going back to Parliament at the end of this year in October, on October 16th, World Food Day, we'll be going back to Parliament. So everything we're doing now, today's actions with regards to local governments and everything else that will happen from now, is to strengthen the movements, to help clarify and to grow it as we move towards October 16, 2021, where we come to ask Parliament and to see what have they done, are they engaging? So now we are moving into phase 2. And phase 2 means advancing deep, just transitions in communities, workplaces, local governments, and people's participatory planning and food sovereignty pathways. So just to also, I think also part of this process is clarifying the language, because sometimes these words can come across as deep words, even amongst us as climate activists. And it's important for us to clarify and make clear what the meaning of these things are, so that people understand and that we mainstream this language so that more of us and more of our citizens can get engaged and involved in this climate justice activism. And that's what we're doing by advancing deep just transitions in communities, workplaces, and the local government. So end of this month, we will be launching our deep just transition tool, and we'll also be hosting workshops with communities and constituency groups on our deep just transition tool, showing to them how through this deep just transition tool that we're currently finalizing, ways in which communities and workplaces and local governments can see how they can help adapt and craft their own adaptation and mitigation strategies for their particular communities, workplaces, and local government, helping them to understand ways in which they can be proactive in those spaces in helping to fight the climate crisis. In the second phase, we'll also be launching our webpage, the Climate Justice Charter Movement webpage. We're hoping that this can be an online platform for activists across the country to share information, to host information, and to also allow for productive engagement in ways in which we can help each other's different struggles and the different causes that everyone is taking up across the movement, because beyond the Climate Justice Charter movement in and of itself, there are different groups who are fighting local and specific actions. And we're hoping that this webpage can help in profiling and spotlighting the different work that people are doing, whilst also helping to grow and strengthen the movement. And then, so just to reiterate, in that second phase, also this end of this month, that begins with the launch of the Deep Just Transition tool. Next month, we're taking the charter to workers, unemployed, informal traders, waste pickers, and workplaces. So we'll be hosting a number of workshops and engagements with these different groups to show them the way in which the Climate Justice Charter and the Climate Justice Charter movement stands in solidarity with them, and the ways in which the Climate Justice Charter also speaks to the issues that they're facing, and why workers, unemployed peoples, the informal traders, and waste pickers across workplaces must see climate justice and climate action as something that they need to be involved in, because it affects these different groups across in different ways. In June, we'll be taking the charter to schools, universities, TVETs, engaging teachers, youth, and children in the Climate Justice Charter, because as a young person myself, the Youth League, colloquially, I think it's important that we understand where we fit within these movements and these structures. And we also need to strengthen our ability to represent our needs and our own interests with regards to our future by being able to be fluent and coherent in how we can take these things forward. And that's what we want to help young people in this country do by taking the Climate Justice Charter to them across wherever they are, to help engage them and give them the tools to be able to speak on their own behalf. In July, we're going to take the charter to places of worship and faith-based communities. South Africa has a diverse range of different belief systems and communities, and there's also a common and shared interest across different beliefs with regards to our position as human beings and our custodial role to protect the earth and our natural environment. And we want to show how faith-based communities can get involved, and how places of worship can act as sites for for moving the conversation of climate justice forward. Which brings us to phase 3, which will be August, and we're building up to the local government elections. So originally the local government elections were supposed to be held in September, but today the announcement has come from the president that the 27th of October will be the date of local government elections. But all the work that we're doing is also building towards helping create awareness amongst communities and our citizens that when you're looking for candidates to vote for to represent your communities, climate justice also has to be on the table. Climate justice has to be on the cards as to what you're looking for in an elected representative. So phase 3 will see us launch the climate justice deal with the work that'll be done by policy experts and researchers on helping to bring the Climate Justice Charter's vision to life. We'll also have an assessment of parties from a standpoint of the Climate Justice Charter, critiquing their climate position, their knowledge of climate justice, and whether they'll be good for communities in our countries in that regard. August, will be taking the charter to women's organizations, spaces, and platforms. It's important to say that we help as the movement make sure that these organizations, these spaces, and these platforms also central in the way in which the charter extends and grows, because as a society, we cannot just tackle climate justice without dealing with some of the gendered nature or the gender issues which have been centralized or calcified by our history. The Climate Justice Charter has to be a feminist project, and we must also break some of the ways in which patriarchal thinking and patriarchal systems have formed and shaped our country in the way that it has. In phase 4, we will be more central with regards to the local government elections and moving towards October 16th as we go back to Parliament. So in this phase, we're going to Parliament with the slogan that we had from last year: end hunger, thirst, pollution, and climate harm. South African government has seriously not been ambitious at all with regards to the crisis. And we know that trying to reach net zero by 2050 is far too late. So we're really trying to galvanize and grow in our momentum to really run this message home. We'll be planning a number of events and local actions for the day, particularly a photo exhibition and online, sorry, a photo exhibition and online events for the day. We'll also, beyond Parliament, we'll also be asking demands of parties in relation to the local government's elections that will be happening after, but also with regards to the past year. Have they taken climate science seriously? What are they doing to show us that they're taking it seriously? Has the Climate Justice Charter been adopted? We haven't heard a word from them yet, which also indicates that the government's not serious on these matters. The People's Food Sovereignty Act, we want to see it being adopted to help end hunger and give people more agency over the production of food. Community deep just transition demands for water. We want to see more access to water, particularly in our water-stressed communities. We want to see eco-housing being built. We want to see an end to pollution. We want to see the creation of climate jobs and more. We want to see if the government is going to be supporting this. Are these parties supporting such actions? And we'll also want to take active steps to see corruption being ended now, because we cannot build a climate justice state if the scourge of corruption continues at the rate that it has. And finally, just to wrap up, so our main focuses as we build and move towards October 16th and for this year, through the work that we'll be doing by targeting different groups throughout the month, is a focus on local elections, demanding a climate justice local government election. We're going to be launching the Climate Justice Deal for South Africa, policy work that concretizes and makes our goals visible and real in a policy framework or policy position. We're going to be returning to Parliament on October 16th, World Food Day, to make sure that the Climate Justice Charter has been adopted. And we'll also take the Arc of South African Life, a visual online aid to show the state of our country right now and what we gain, what we will lose in a heating world. And we'll also be launching the Climate Justice Charter Movement's digital platform. And also a very important thing is to strengthen the petition throughout everything that we're doing in the build up to October, throughout every month and every group that we're engaging with. We need to strengthen our petition. And I will end there by asking that, and I will share it also if it has not been shared yet, to ask that we may all take the petition out and make sure that we can spread and share it among society. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Owande. Just to the attendees, please note that in the chat box, there's 2 links that have been sent. One is for the petition that can be signed, and the other is for the resources on the Climate Justice Charter. All right, so a lot was covered today, and I just like to give our attendees the space to ask questions if they have any at the moment. You can just address your questions in the chat box. In the meantime, I would like to ask each of our speakers a question. So also one last thing, also I'd just like to ask the speakers to please do share your slides if you can as well, at the end, like before the end of this talk. Okay, so the first question goes to Rais and about the Working Class Summit. So just a question, as an individual, as a student now, how can one attend this? When is it? How can a person gain access to the paper that is yet to be published? If you could just respond to that.
Sorry, Chair, can you just repeat the question? You just cut towards the end for me.
All right. This question is addressed to Rais about the Working Class Summit, about when is it exactly, if the paper that he's co-authoring, how will it be made available to the public or students particularly? Yes. That's basically the question that I asked.
So the summit is scheduled to go forward in June. It has been moved from the original date in August. Again, it's about coordinating different spheres of struggle. The question is, as students on the left, do we have a party? So in this particular case, when it comes to the issue of either a party or, organized student leadership, there is a lack of leadership. There is a lack of structure. There's a lack of socialist alternatives within the student movement. And here, I'm going to directly criticize the parties that are still embedded in capitalism. I mean, of course, the ANC and the DA is, we're not even going to speak about the DA, but even the radical parties, so to speak, like the EFF, still embed themselves within a certain bourgeois thinking that is problematic. And so there is a need, and this is a part of the goal of the Working Class Summit, is to lay the foundations for a mass workers' party where many tendencies come together. So as an individual, the best way to engage the Working Class Summit is through one of the structures that's involved in the Working Class Summit. And so I can share, there are quite a few NGOs as well that are engaging the summit. To my understanding, all of the papers will be made publicly available after the summit. So I will share that when the time comes. And yeah, I hope that does answer the question. But broadly, directly participating in the Working Class Summit, to my knowledge, is not possible as an individual. It's being done through the structures that exist inside the structures and tendencies that are represented at the summit, which is being organized and hosted by SAFTU.
All right, thank you very much. The following question is addressed to William. As part of the South African food sovereignty, yes, how can someone, as an individual, do you have to be part of an organization to be a part of the South African food sovereignty? And if you aren't part of an organization, but you do want to assist, just be involved in general, how does one go about that?
Thanks, Nkosazana. So I think the person who's probably best to talk to is Awande. The answer in short is that no, you do not necessarily have to be a member of an organization to participate. Of course, one of the main initiatives of the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign is the Climate Justice Charter movement, which is burgeoning at the moment. And so that is probably where one's individual participation can be most effective, as that work dovetails with all of the other work that the Food Sovereignty Campaign does on water-stressed communities, on food sovereignty specifically, and a whole host of other initiatives. So if one is interested in participating, people have shared links on the chat as well, and there are various groups that I think people can join. I'll ask Awande for the details on that. There's a youth group, as Awande was mentioning earlier. So I think it's also a matter of attending this, for example, as a way to get involved, because we'll now also have your contact details. You would have made contact with the Physics Council, which is also heavily involved in a lot of this work. So I think rest assured that now we know who you are, I suppose, that avenues for people to participate and get involved will be made.
All right, thank you. And then lastly, I'd like Awande just to also continue on the question that I addressed to William, but also just a question with regards to the 16th of October. I'm not sure if you might have covered it, but what is the general thinking of, depending on, let's say the government has a negative response to the deadline, how do you predict that we'll move forward from there, depending on, let's say, if there's a negative response or not a response by the 16th of October?
Thank you. Let me just answer the first question to follow up from Will is you can reach out to me. I'm putting my email in the chat if you'd like to get involved with the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. It is not member specific, but it is kind of organization focused due to the nature of the work and the capacities that they bring. But as William said, the fundamental overarching work that the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign is trying to push is that of advancing and pushing the Climate Justice Charter movement. And you don't have to, you can be an individual and participate and be part of the movement. So, and if you'd like to help and be plugged in, just send my email over there. You can contact me. And then I can see how I can help you be involved in the way in which you'd like to involve. With regards to the second question, if Parliament doesn't respond in a way that we feel is what we were looking for, or it does not take it seriously, to be honest, I don't know if Parliament will respond in the way in which we expect, looking at how the South African government has been taking this issue forward in the way in which they've been conducting themselves with regards to climate. But what's more important for us, beyond in the immediate term, beyond what the government actually says, is for us to be able to build and strengthen this movement and to continually show the ways in which we can articulate how climate justice interacts with the everyday needs of South Africans right now, from our inequality, unemployment problems, our energy crisis, our hunger crisis, you know, even issues concerning gender-based violence and the patriarchal nature of our state. There's a way in which climate justice interacts and impacts on each of these questions that we're facing right now. And so our work goes beyond getting a nice response from Parliament. I think, you know, not to be very blunt, even though we've taken the charter to them, we're not taking it to them to say, adopt the charter and then like, it's over, it's done. Government of South Africa, please take over all of this. What we're doing is galvanizing South African citizens to be active participants in shaping how our state moves towards a climate justice state, which means whether they respond in a timely and positive fashion or not, our work in the long term and medium term is to shift our state towards climate justice, which means that we must constantly be on them and constantly help to push these alternatives forward. Because the world right now, if you follow the geopolitical kind of shifts with the new Biden administration, is moving in a direction where the West and the powerful countries are rhetorically seem to be more serious on climate. Our country is probably going to follow line to seem like they're being serious, but if you follow the way in which our government is moving with regards to how they want to provide energy to make up for Eskom's deficiencies, the purchasing of power boats, and the insistence on fuel, our work is definitely going to be cut out for us. We still have a lot of work to do, and what we're doing and what our focus is to, through October 16 and all this other work that we're doing, is to show them that we exist. There are climate activists in this country. We are here. And this is just the beginning of us making ourselves a force to be reckoned with.
All right, thank you so much. We have reached the end of our talk. Unfortunately, there aren't any other messages or questions that have come up in the chat. I would like to thank the speakers for taking the time and for sharing their vast knowledge on this topic. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to attend this webinar. And I do hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Please do social distance. And right, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Nkosazana, and thank you to my panelists and everyone else too. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, comrades. Thanks for having us. Thanks for hosting this discussion.